She stood frozen as her old classmates pointed, laughing. "Isn't that Emily? Still poor, still pathetic." But then the manager walked up, bowed, and said loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear, "Miss Emily is the owner of this establishment. 10 years of silence, humiliation, and survival now answered in a single moment of power. This isn't just revenge. It's justice served cold right where it hurt most. Have you ever dreamed of turning the tables like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments." They called me Emily Raghart behind my back, sometimes to my face. The sun had barely warmed the bricks of Riverside High, yet the heat between teenage glances was sharper than the May air. Senior year was almost over. There were countdowns scrawled in every notebook, laughter in the hallways, hugs, and camera flashes. It was the season of fake nostalgia and last-minute redemption. But for me, it was just a season of endurance. I know it's not fair. Mom once whispered, threading a needle through the torn knee of my jeans, her eyes red-rimmed from the night shift. But keep going. The world doesn't stay cruel forever. At 17, I wasn't sure if I believed that. Especially on yearbook photo day when Valerie strutted across the gym in her designer boots, her perfume trailing behind like royalty. I had worn the only blouse I owned without stains, the one Mom had salvaged from a clearance rack and ironed before dawn. My shoes were scuffed a size too big. Goodwill's finest. I didn't meet anyone's eyes as I lined up for the group photo. "Make room," Valerie chirped. She elbowed me just hard enough. "Don't want your discount outfit showing up next to mine." Jason laughed. He always did when Valerie led the charge. "Should we ask the school photographer if they take food stamps?" Amanda said nothing, but her eye roll echoed louder than words. I didn't reply. I never did. I stood there smiling small for the camera, trying to fold myself invisible. Later in the cafeteria, Valerie threw a golden envelope at my tray. "Hey, Emily, you're invited to the senior picnic." The table of popular kids turned, watching. I stared at the envelope, stunned. She smirked. "Just kidding. That's actually a flyer for a food drive. Thought it'd help." Laughter exploded around me. Even Jenny, sitting silently at the edge of their circle, lowered her eyes, but she didn't laugh. Not out loud. I left the tray and the envelope behind. The rain started just as I reached the bike rack. My tires hissed against the slick pavement. By the time I made it home, my jeans clung to my legs like skin and my blouse stuck to my spine. I peeled it off and hung it over the radiator. My journal was still open from the night before. I wrote, "I've been erased while still existing." Mom was asleep on the couch, her lunchbox still unopened beside her. I tiptoed to my room and lay on my mattress without bothering to change out of my damp clothes. The ceiling fan spun above me, each rotation ticking off a second I couldn't get back. The next day was graduation rehearsal. The gym reeked of sweat and polyester gowns. We were lined up in alphabetical order, and I stood between a boy I'd never spoken to and Valerie, whose perfume I could taste in the air. "Don't trip on your shoes," she whispered. Wouldn't want the charity case to ruin the procession. My fists clenched. A few students turned their heads. Some smirked. None of the teachers said a word. I didn't respond. I simply stared ahead, jaw locked, heart thudding. I knew I wouldn't be at prom. I wouldn't be at the after party. I wouldn't be remembered by choice. After graduation, I disappeared. No photos, no status updates, no goodbyes. Jason's voice still lingered from that last school assembly, coded in lazy mockery. "Bet she ends up flipping burgers or scrubbing toilets." I heard it. I never forgot it. I didn't flip burgers, not exactly. But I did scrub a lot of grease off kitchen tiles. I scrubbed floors and sinks and walked so heavy they could break a wrist. The summer of 2013, I moved to Boston with nothing but my mother's last paycheck and a handwritten list of places that might hire someone with no degree, no connections, and no plan B. I started in Chinatown, back of house, at a dim sum spot where no one cared what my name was. Only that I didn't burn the bow. I chopped garlic until my fingers blistered stacked bamboo baskets in towers and listened more than I spoke. That's where I first met Martin, a sous chef, who rarely smiled but noticed everything. "You don't flinch," he said once, handing me a pan too hot to touch barehanded. I dropped it anyway. He didn't mock me. He just handed me a towel. Martin became something I didn't know I was allowed to want steady. He taught me when to stir and when to wait, when not to talk. If the broth whispers, don't shout over it, he told me. I carried that lesson everywhere. By 2015, I was working double shifts mornings in a Vietnamese kitchen evenings with Chef Laurent, a grizzled French master who demanded absolute silence. "Listen to the sauce," he said once, slapping my spoon. "It will tell you when it's ready." I began filling a leather-bound notebook with recipes, revisions, sketches of plating ideas. No Instagram, no TikTok, just ink and repetition. Then 2016 came. Mom collapsed during her second shift. Stroke. I got the call from a neighbor who found her keys still in the front door. I missed her final breath by 42 minutes. I spent 2 days in silence and then went back to work. Grief is a gas, it fills any space you let it. I didn't let it. I funneled it into sauces, marinades, broth reductions. That year, I started selling fusion bio from a folding table at farmers markets. Saffron and Steel began as 3 folding chairs and a homemade sign. I didn't smile for the press when they came. I didn't let them take photos of me. I said the chef was anonymous. I wore a bandana and kept my head down. Let the food speak louder than my name ever had. Martin stuck by me. Helped me crunch the numbers, introduced me to a quiet investor named Lynn who liked people who didn't talk too much. I told her I wouldn't put my name on anything, not on websites, not on signage. She nodded. "As long as the food's loud," she said. In 2021, we opened the first brick-and-mortar Saffron and Steel. 12 seats tucked between a laundromat and a tattoo parlor. The Ganggang miso dish got a write-up in a niche food blog. Then another. Suddenly we had waiting lists. I still cleaned the walk-in fridge myself. Still walked to work. Still used that same notebook now grease-stained and full. The walls of my office were bare except for a chalkboard with the daily specials and a pinned photo of my mom, younger than I ever remembered her, holding a spatula like a sword. I was about to revise the tasting menu when Martin knocked slow and deliberate. I looked up. He hesitated. "Table of 3 just booked," he said. Valerie, Jason, Amanda. I didn't recognize their voices at first, but some wounds remember better than names. The dinner rush at Saffron and Steel always came in waves, sharp rhythmic like a tide pulled by ambition and reservation apps. I was reviewing the wine pairing updates at the hostess stand, the edge of my chef coat still damp from plating 16 scallop dishes in a row. That's when I heard them. Laughter too loud for the room's elegance. A voice pitched higher than necessary, tinged with mockery. Another chuckle, deeper smug. The third quieter, but punctuated by a scoff. "Who let that in here?" a woman sneered somewhere behind the golden glass partition. "She looks like she wandered in from the alley." A pause. The sound of a fork clinking porcelain. Then, "Maybe she's one of those invisible dishwashers," a man said. "Poor girl, probably mistook the front door for the back." My shoulders stiffened. I hadn't even turned around. But I knew. Not from the words, not yet, but from the undertone. The practiced cruelty. The way people sound when they assume you don't belong. Or worse, when they hope to make it true. Years ago, I'd told Mom one day they'll step into my world without realizing it's mine. That day had come. I turned slowly. The corner booth was occupied by 3 well-dressed guests, their coats already draped over the velvet seats. Valerie was swirling a glass of white, her earrings catching the dim chandelier light. Jason lounged like he owned the space, still broad-shouldered and blandly handsome. Amanda, cool, quiet. Amanda was taking a photo of her cocktail lips curled in faint disdain. And then Jason looked up. "Oh my God, Emily." His grin was wide, disbelieving. "Is that you? Damn, thought you'd be in a laundromat or something." Valerie's eyes scanned my uniform. "Wait, you work here?" Amanda arched an eyebrow. "Didn't know they hired nostalgia acts." I didn't flinch. Not then. Not when Jason leaned back clearly, waiting for me to sputter to explain to shrink. "I like your jacket," Valerie added, faux innocent. "Is that standard issue? Or something you brought from home?" I looked at them all 3 and remembered the way my stomach used to knot when I passed their lunch table. I remembered Jason yelling Raghard across the field, Valerie laughing until tears smeared her eyeliner, Amanda's silence that still managed to cut deeper than noise. But I said nothing. Not yet. Instead, I nodded once and walked past their table, calm and deliberate. I could feel the eyes of the room tracking me, the tension a whisper against the velvet walls. At the bar, Martin caught my gaze. He raised a brow. I gave the subtlest nod. He crossed the room like he'd been rehearsing the moment all day. When he reached the corner booth, his posture was impeccable, his voice smooth but loud enough to carry. "Miss Emily," he said, bowing slightly, "your private tasting room is ready. Shall I bring the chef's wine list?" As usual, the pause that followed was exquisite. Jason blinked. Amanda lowered her phone. Valerie's wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. "Wait," she said, eyes wide. You're the owner?" Jason's mouth opened, but no words came. Amanda looked at her drink like it might offer answers. A few tables over, a young woman angled her phone ever so subtly. Red recording dot, glowing unnoticed by most except me. I let the silence stretch, let the discomfort bloom. Then with a faint smile, I said, "Yes, and I'll be dining here, right next to the people who once said I didn't belong." The most powerful thing I said that night was nothing, just silence and ownership. The room hadn't settled since Martin's announcement. Conversations dropped mid-sentence, forks froze in midair, and the air thickened like a held breath. My former classmates looked up at me not as a classmate anymore, but as something else entirely. I didn't need a crown or even a nameplate. I had the floor, the walls, the wine list. I had the whole room. Martin stood beside their table posture, perfect hands behind his back. His voice was clear, measured as he turned toward the other diners. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it is my privilege to reintroduce Miss Emily Hart, founder and CEO of the Saffron and Steel Group and the visionary behind every dish you've tasted tonight." A ripple passed through the room, murmurs, subtle glances, the flicker of lifted phones. I didn't stand. I didn't bow. I just sat. I took my seat 2 tables away from them, directly within sight, but far enough to let the silence grow teeth. Martin placed a crisp napkin on my lap and poured the Bordeaux I'd requested earlier. I sipped it slowly, eyes resting not on them, but on the sommelier making a perfect pour at the next table. Still, I could feel their panic. Jason leaned forward, elbows on the table, mouth tight. "This is a bit much, isn't it?" He muttered, too low for the others, but loud enough for me. I looked at him. "Not for 10 years of silence and condescension," I said simply. Amanda dropped her fork. The clatter echoed across marble and linen. She reached for her water, missed, then tried again, her fingers trembling. Valerie's face shifted from disbelief to performance, chin up, lashes fluttering. "Emily," she said, voice coated in saccharine regret, "I had no idea. Honestly, we didn't mean well. Maybe we were kids, but look at you. This is incredible. Truly." I met her gaze with nothing but calm. "No need to rewrite history. You were clear the first time." Her smile faltered. Martin reappeared beside me, offering the updated menu for next quarter. I didn't look at it. "Martin," I said, setting down my wine glass, "cancel their table." He gave the slightest nod. "This place," I added, still looking at, "Valerie doesn't serve disrespect." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was heavy, like justice settling into place. Jason stood, knocking his chair back. "You can't just kick people out for old high school stuff." "You're not being kicked out for high school stuff," I replied. "You're being asked to leave because you brought that same cruelty here as if nothing's changed." Amanda tried to gather her things without making noise, but her bracelet caught on the napkin. She cursed under her breath. Valerie stood slowly, her face flushing a deep red. A security staff member, subtle silent, approached the table. "If you'll follow me," he said with a nod. They left in a flurry of whispered justifications and awkward glances. A phone clattered onto a plate as Amanda bumped a server's arm. A few guests clapped soft, unsure, but most just watched. That's when I noticed the woman at the bar. She was the same one who'd angled her phone earlier, her screen still glowing. She tapped, then swiped, then tapped again. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Then again. The video was up. Captioned, "Rich bullies mock a woman at her own five-star restaurant and get escorted out." Within minutes, the clip hit 50,000 views. Martin, returning from the front, handed me a clean napkin. "Justice doesn't always shout," he said under his breath. "Sometimes it just owns the building. Apologies given under pressure aren't apologies, they're survival tactics." The morning sun broke soft over the herb garden, its golden spill catching on dew-dusted thyme and rows of Thai basil. The city hummed somewhere below, distant and irrelevant. Up here, I let the scent of rosemary ground me. I cradled a mug of oolong as I scrolled through the endless stream of reactions. The video had passed 2 million views overnight. There were hashtags, think pieces. "Rich bullies get served humility." "The quiet owner who said everything without saying anything." People wanted to interview me. They wanted my side. They called me a symbol, a queen, a quiet revolution. But I wasn't any of those things. I was someone who'd once stood in a Goodwill changing room holding back tears because the shoes didn't fit, but they were the only pair under $5. Martin stepped onto the rooftop holding a tablet. "We've had 2 investment offers," he said, "both with open capital. No branding demands. Just interest." I nodded, eyes still on the phone. The notifications kept pulsing one after another. "Your silence made the loudest statement," he added, leaning on the railing. I didn't answer. A direct message sat unopened at the top of my inbox. "Valerie." The preview was a carefully composed plea, 3 lines probably reviewed by 5 friends and a PR intern. I didn't read the rest. I tapped delete without hesitation. There's a kind of apology that tastes like rust in your mouth, processed impersonal, spat out to save face, not mend it. I opened another tab. My email had dozens of unread subject lines. Most I ignored, but one stood out. From Jenny Brooks' subject, I was silent too. "I'm sorry." I stared at it. Jenny, the only one who never laughed, never defended me. The one who looked at her shoes when I cried but never said a word. I hadn't thought of her in years. I clicked it. It wasn't long. Just a few lines. I saw the video. "You don't owe me anything. I just needed to say I should have spoken up. I didn't. I'm sorry." There was no ask, no request for connection. Just guilt laid bare. I opened a new draft and typed, "Want to talk over tea, not for forgiveness, for understanding." I paused, then hit send. Martin glanced over. "Big move." "No," I said. "A real one." He smiled but didn't press further. Later that morning, he briefed me on the business fallout. 2 reporters camped by the back door, he said. "One from a podcast. One wants to do a Netflix piece." "Tell them nothing," I replied. "No interviews, no statements." He waited, unsure. "You could shape the narrative." "I already did," I said. 10 years of building. That's the story." Martin nodded, then handed me a wrapped pastry. "Try the new tart. Yuzu and tamarind. Compliments of the kitchen." As I took a bite, my phone pinged again. Jenny had replied. "Yes, but not at your restaurant. You choose the place." Success isn't the sound of applause. It's peace without having to prove anything. The tea house sat like a breath held between rushes of traffic and silence. Nestled on a quiet street outside Boston, it didn't flaunt artisanal menus or curated playlists. It smelled like cardamom and old wood, the kind of place where water is poured without asking and conversations drift without urgency. Jenny was already at the table when I arrived. She stood awkwardly, unsure whether to offer a hug or a handshake, finally settling on a nod. I mirrored it. We sat. Neither of us mentioned Riverside High. Not the cruel jokes, the photo day sabotage, or the silence that weighed more than the words ever did. We didn't need to. Those chapters had already closed. Instead, we talked about the in-between years, about jobs and mothers and the way grief ages you without asking permission. Jenny spoke of a moment months ago when she'd seen a teenager mocked for wearing knockoff sneakers. I wanted to say something, she said. But I froze. Again. "You still sent that email," I replied. "That wasn't nothing." She let out a soft breath, eyes misting but not breaking. I didn't come here for forgiveness. I didn't offer it, I said gently. Her smile trembled, but it stayed. Outside, the wind carried a leaf past the window. A child ran by, chasing it, laughter trailing behind. We finished our tea in easy quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't punish. When we parted, there were no promises to keep in touch. Just a shared look that said some wounds don't need bandages, only air. That evening, back at the restaurant, I tied my apron with practiced ease. A line cook was struggling with the citrus beurre blanc. I dipped a spoon, tasted, frowned. Too much zest, I said, adjusting the ratio on the prep card. Pull it back a quarter. He nodded, grateful. I stayed through the dinner rush, not in the office, but by the grill plating duck confit and wiping down pans. No press, no photos. Just steam steel and a rhythm that felt like home. Later, I wrote in my journal. I thought I wanted revenge. I only needed truth and a table I built myself. Walking home past the lit windows of the city, I passed a vendor selling roasted chestnuts. A little girl tugged on her father's sleeve, pointing at me. "Is that the restaurant lady?" I smiled but said nothing. When I got upstairs, Martin had left a bottle of cava on the counter and a single line of text blinking on my phone screen. "You've been nominated Chef of the Year, Boston Culinary Board." The girl once mocked for her silence became the woman who let it speak volumes. In a world that once dismissed her presence, she reclaimed space not with noise but with undeniable truth. Justice long delayed arrived not as vengeance but as clarity measured, earned, and absolute. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, it resonated precisely because it had been withheld. Sometimes the loudest reckoning is delivered in a whisper that can't be ignored.